Hi, I'm Alex Hayden. Thank you for taking this moment out of your day. I'm here to tell you what happened to me. I've been trying to live with this and I've been trying my best to rebuild my life for far too long. My story is not entirely unique. However, what I'm about to tell you has impacted my life catastrophically for what seems like forever. This video provides the details of my downfall. I provide only facts and show how a left-wing journalist destroyed my career and in doing so destroyed my life. Now, as you can see from the length of this video, this is not a short story. However, I want to show you and the world that I'm not the bad person the left portrays me as. Before this happened to me, I was an active volunteer for various charities and I regularly gave to numerous environmental organisations. I spent most of my life earning what many would consider to be a very high income. This allowed me to give back to the wider world. It all started 2 years ago, in the early spring of 2018. I was working in a hedge fund trading bonds. This took up most of my time due to the long hours. However, I had for my entire life always had an interest in politics. This stemmed way back to my school days, university days, and early working life. In 2006, I was living in South Hackney in the ward of Hoxton, which is now Hoxton West. I was a member of the Conservative Party. I agreed to stand in a very unwinnable seat along with two other Conservatives in the ward of Hoxton. As predicted, I came last along with the other Conservatives. This was Hackney after all. People don't vote Conservative in Hackney. However, I believed in democracy at the time, meaning people should have the chance to vote for an alternative to Labour. In 2010, I could see in the borough of Tower Hamlets that the Labour Party was fraudulently buying the vote through postal vote fraud, and I predicted that the Labour mayoral candidate was corrupt. As this was a borough I had once lived in, I wanted to voice my discontent for what was going on in Tower Hamlets. And I also wanted to stand for free speech, so I migrated to the Pirate Party. Of course, this being Tower Hamlets in Bethnal Green, Labour easily won that election. However, I did make my voice known that I believed electing a Tower Hamlets mayor was a wrong decision for the electorate and it would lead to corruption. Lo and behold, years later, I was proved right as Labour mayor was found guilty of mass corruption. After this election, I grew despondent with politics. I realised, at least in London, people are tribal and will rarely care to see the corruption that is in the world around them. I concentrated on my career. I focused on making money in the financial markets. I did this for many years. However, despite standing for the Pirate Party in 2010, I remained a follower and a member of the Conservative Party. In early 2018, I was asked if I would be a Conservative candidate in the Hoxton West ward, as the Conservatives were failing to find enough people to put on the ballot paper. I declined at first as I thought I would be too busy working. I was then told that I need only be a paper candidate. A paper candidate is simply someone who is on the ballot paper there to make up the numbers. I agreed and said as long as I don't have to campaign, knowing too well that the Conservatives always come last in Hoxton. Hipsters, progressives and long-time Hoxton residents aren't drawn to Conservative politics. My name was officially on the ballot paper. The election would be on the 5th of May 2018. This would prove to be one of the worst decisions I would ever make. In the run-up to the 5th of May election, I would get a call from the lady running the Conservatives' election campaign in Hackney. I was told that the Muslim Conservative mayoral candidate for Hackney wasn't able to make the hustings, and she knew I was a fairly good public speaker and debater, and asked if I would be good enough to stand in. I hesitated. I really didn't have time for this. I was under a lot of pressure at work to perform and work USA hours. However, as I'd previously met the Conservatives' Muslim mayoral candidate, I thought he was a good man. I agreed to help him, and I also agreed to take part. It was an action that I'm convinced put me on the radar of a so-called journalist who was consistently being very closely aligned with the Labour Party. The so-called journalist's name was Barnett. Barnett decided to do some digging into my internet history. He discovered a few things about me. This left-wing activist then decided to reach out to me via Twitter using the Hackney Citizen's Twitter account. He sent me a direct message via Twitter, also known as a DM.
Dear Alexander Hayden, we understand you are the Conservative Party candidate for Hoxton West. We are writing a story about your candidacy and I want to give you an opportunity to comment. It has come to our attention that a number of online statements you have made express active support for far-right anti-Muslim politics. On the 18th of March, you attended a rally led by the far-right activist and former English Defence League leader, Tommy Robinson. You have said it's a disgrace that the UK refused entry to Austrian far-right generation identity activist Martin Sellner for the same event. On your Facebook page, you have endorsed a piece from the far-right Gates of Vienna website adding, "The Crusaders were simply a response to Islam spreading through Europe by the sword. Should they have sat back and done nothing and watched while Christians were taxed into submission or beheaded?" You have also said Islam is a violent religion and promoted a book by the former editor of Breitbart UK on how Sharia law is coming to a neighbourhood near you. We wanted to ask, 1. How do you respond to the observations that these comments and actions suggest you support far-right anti-Muslim politics? 2. Did you make your views known to the Conservative Party during the selection process? Please get back to us by noon tomorrow, Tuesday the 17th of April, via editor@hackneycitizen.co.uk with the answers to these questions and anything else you want to say, so that your position is represented in our story. Thanks, Hackney Citizen.
I got this message while I was sat at my desk in my workplace. I took it for the smear that it was. At this moment in time, I didn't know who the reporter was or who was writing this story. I simply knew someone at the Hackney Citizen was out for blood, and they were going to print something with comment or not. This is a common theme in British journalism: attack and smear those who don't think the same as them. Is this journalism or activism? Genuine question that. I thought for a moment, should I just ignore this? I wanted to ignore this, but I didn't know what would be printed. Judging by the content of the DM in my Twitter inbox, the article wasn't going to be pretty. I decided I had to defend myself from this blatant smear. At least provide context, as this parasitic rag certainly had a history of attacking Conservatives. I have always been an advocate for open discussion and open debate. The exact reason I have frequently visited Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park from time to time. To put it simply, I enjoy hearing different perspectives and learning from others' viewpoints. Throughout my history, I've always loved a good debate. The views I held when I was 17 were very different to the views I held when I was 27, and they changed again when I was in my 30s. All because I've challenged my own viewpoints and those of others in a civil and open debate. On March 18, 2018, I was at Speaker's Corner. I, and many who believed in free speech, were there that day. They came from all walks of life and every religious faith. However, to a far-left activist who wrote for the Hackney Citizen, every man and his dog that day would be smeared with the suggestion that they attended a far-right rally. Effectively, Adam Barnett not only was smearing me with his accusation that being at Speaker's Corner meant I and others were attending a far-right rally, what he was stating was simply not true. He was being incredibly insulting to the thousands of free speech advocates who were there that day. Thankfully, I made a video of that exact day and published it before his DM was sent to me. He knew I had attended not from the video, but from the fact that I had checked in at Speaker's Corner that day on Facebook and did it publicly. Little did I know that those images of simply a check-in would come back to haunt me. If you'd like to watch the video that I posted days after attending Speaker's Corner, I've posted the link in the description. The video has always been free to view on my YouTube channel, and the link is here in the top right corner of this video should you wish to watch it. However, I would advise watching till the end of this video until you watch that video. I decided to respond to the left-wing activists to at least defend myself. I sent the following DM. Good to hear from you, and straight away I can see your angle. On the 18th of March, I attended Speaker's Corner. On that day, Tommy Robinson was indeed speaking, along with many other speakers whose views range from extreme left, extreme right, centre, extremely religious, and those who do not care for religion. Do I believe in the right to free speech? Yes. Do I side with every view of every person who attended Speaker's Corner on that day? Of course I don't. But I do believe in their right to speak. I attended that day as in the previous week Brittany Prettybone, Martin Sellner and Lauren Southern had been stopped at the UK border, detained and then banned from the country. I personally think this is a disgrace, considering they are conservative journalists and lean to the right on the political spectrum. Do they preach hate? No. And yet the UK government had never stopped a number of hate preachers entering our country and preaching hate. I actually made a YouTube video of my attendance to the 18th of March event at Speaker's Corner. I stand by the right to support free speech, even though I may not agree with what Martin Sorrell stands for. Link to the YouTube video. Does the Hackney Gazette? I meant to say Hackney Citizen, but you can see how I get the two confused. They're both minor rags, but I meant to say Hackney Citizen. Does the Hackney Citizen not believe in the right to free speech and for political ideas to be challenged? As you went through my Facebook page, I imagine an endorsement is a simple like. Do I disagree with the statement that the Crusades were a response to Islam spreading through Europe by the sword? Of course I don't disagree with this. How else do you think Islam was spread through Europe? It certainly wasn't through peaceful engagement. Or have you not studied the history of medieval Europe? And for your guide, am I siding with the Christians? No. I'm an atheist who understands their response to a full-on attack for hundreds of years. I've stated Islam as a violent political ideology. Note the word political and not religious. Note, I do not refer to Muslims, I refer to the political ideology. How do I respond that I support the far right? Define far right. I don't support any far right parties and I'm not anti-Muslim. Now take note that I said that. Is it considered far right if I had an issue with communism or fascism? And a note to yourself, I do have a problem with these violent political ideologies. My views have always been public. If you mean the fact that I'm happy to voice my discontent for communism, fascism, Islam, and any other extreme political ideologies, there is no secret to this. Regards, Alex van der Hayden. Sent April 16th, 2018 at 1:44 PM. The tick next to it basically means it's been read. So I respond back and say, as I can see you have read this, I won't send this as an email. Sent April 16th, 2018 at 2:11 PM. Tick also, they've read that.
Thanks for your reply. You didn't answer my second question. Did you make your views on Islam known to the Conservative Party during the selection process? Hackney Citizen.
Did I walk up to the selection meeting wearing a t-shirt saying, Islam is a violent political ideology? No. Did they ask if I buy the George Bush Jr. 2001 tag that Islam is a religion of peace? No. Note that I make the mistake here of referring to them as the Hackney Gazette when in fact I should be referring to them as the Hackney Citizen. It's very clear what angle the Hackney Citizen is attempting to take. If you want to use this ridiculous term Islamophobia, let it be known before you dare publish anything that with the term Islamophobia, Islam seeks to shield itself, an ideology, from criticism. It's as if every time you said smoking was a filthy habit, you were perceived to be calling all smokers filthy people. Human beings have rights and are entitled to respect, but when did we start extending those rights to ideas, books, and beliefs? You'd think the difference would be clear, but it isn't. The ploy has worked over and over again, and now everyone seems petrified of being tagged with the label. The phobia of being called Islamophobic is on the rise, and it's becoming much more rampant, powerful, and dangerous than Islamophobia itself. Thanks to journalists like yourself who seem to want to label those who disagree with a political ideology. Sent April 16th, 2018 at 5:30 PM. And that would be the last contact I would have with the Hackney Citizen. They didn't attempt to phone me, they didn't attempt to knock on my door, they did nothing of the sort. I felt like I was damned if I didn't respond, and I was damned if I did. Many defenders of common sense and free speech, such as Jordan Peterson, Douglas Murray, and Christopher Hitchens, have all at one stage stated you should never apologise. They will never accept your apology if you apologise. They will simply see blood and go after you like a rabid dog. As far as I was concerned, I had nothing to apologise about. I wasn't racist, xenophobic, or bigoted, and yet I would be labelled as all of these in the coming days and weeks, all because I dared to question the political ideology that is Islam. This video isn't to argue one way or the other on the rights and wrongs of Islam. If Islam gives people peace in their lives, this is great. However, the issue arises for me and other infidels when Islam impacts their lives negatively. This video is simply to present what has happened to me for daring to have a view. Unlike the Marxist left, I believe all sides should be given the freedom to practice their faith, have a view on anything, and all should be able to engage in a dialogue of ideas without the fear of being smeared, attacked, or doxed. Doxing refers to the practice of using the internet to source out and collect someone's personal and private information and then publicly releasing that information online. Derived originally from the term documents, the term is an abbreviated version of dropping docs, a method of revenge that dates back to the hacker culture of the early 1990s. This would not be the first time someone has doxed me. With hindsight, I should have seen this as a warning. However, 2 years prior to this, when I was running a brokerage in the city of London, a fanatical female Islamist called up my workplace and demanded that I should be fired because I dared to be critical of Islam in a public forum. At the time, I laughed it off as it was my company and I was the boss. I should have seen this as what was to come. No person or company should feel threatened by those who hold radical religious views. And yet submitting to those that follow the book of submission seems to be very commonplace in the 21st century. One day went by and the Hackney Citizen printed the article about me. The title of the article was this, if you can believe it: Tory candidate in Hoxton suspended for anti-Muslim posts on social media. 12 months later, I would finally get them to change the title, but not before the damage was done to my reputation and my career. The title is now Tory candidate in Hoxton suspended for anti-Islam posts on social media. The better title would not exist. However, they printed it and ran with it. Let's read the workmanship of the unbiased, not in any way linked to the Labour Party or Momentum or Antifa, Adam Barnett.
Tory candidate in Hoxton suspended for anti-Muslim posts on social media by Adam Barnett, local democracy reporter.
Well, guess what? It turns out the local democracy reporters are sponsored by the BBC. So the taxpayer-funded BBC announced in 2017 that it would be funding local democracy reporters. In total, in 2017, it was funding 143 full-time and 2 part-time local democracy reporters at 58 news organisations, one of which was the Hackney Citizen, and one of these reporters was Adam Barnett. BBC taxpayer money, supposedly advertised by the BBC as BBC's local democracy reporting collaborative and moral good, or given the fact that we know the angle of the BBC is extremely left-wing biased, a taxpayer-funded initiative to basically smear anyone on the right of the political spectrum. What you are about to realise, the Hackney Citizen is not an impartial, free-thinking publication. It's not actually interested in telling you the news. It's a failing vehicle for extreme people to attack and smear other people. And this time, the attack was on myself.
A council candidate in Hackney has been suspended by the Conservative Party for anti-Muslim posts on social media, the Citizen can reveal. Alexander Van ter Hayden, standing for the Conservatives in Hoxton West, has called Islam a violent political ideology comparable to fascism and communism, and recently attended a rally headed by the former English Defence League leader Tommy Robinson. He has also called the UK is refusing entry to alt-right activists who target NGO ships rescuing migrants a disgrace, and said the Crusades was simply a response to Islam spreading through Europe by the sword. The Hackney Conservative Party says it was not aware of ter Hayden's social media posts and is urgently investigating, adding that ter Hayden has been suspended with immediate effect.
Can I just point out to this reporter that my name might be double-barreled, but it doesn't mean you can miss out Van. My name is Van ter Hayden. Not ter Hayden, but Van ter Hayden. But let's continue.
Ter Hayden claims he is not anti-Muslim, only anti-Islam.
And yet here you are, printing a headline saying Tory candidate in Hoxton suspended for anti-Muslim posts on social media. Would you like to provide some evidence where I am anti-Muslim in this post of yours, Adam?
The Hackney Conservative Federation, in a statement today, said, "Yesterday we were forwarded an email from Adam Barnett of the Hackney Citizen regarding posts made by Alex Van ter Hayden on social media."
See, there's inconsistency in his writing. He calls me Van ter Hayden there, but above he calls me ter Hayden. And then down below, and again, he's going to call me Van ter Hayden. Which is it? Your readers might be confused.
Mr. Van ter Hayden's membership of the Conservative Party has been suspended with immediate effect.
Just like to point something out here. That was news to me, actually, because at this stage, I hadn't spoken to the Conservative Party. I hadn't even had an email from the Conservative Party, but I was hearing it firsthand in this hack of a newspaper that I'd been suspended from the Conservative Party.
Imitez Lunat, the Conservative Party candidate for Mayor of Hackney, has been contacted for comment, but has not replied at this time of publication.
Well, there's a relief, given the fact that I was trying to help him out in the first place, but yeah, go on.
Hayden, a video blogger, DJ and former Pirate Party candidate, attended the Tommy Robinson Free Speech rally in Hyde Park on 18 March and shared photos and video of the event on Facebook and YouTube. In a Facebook discussion about Islam under the photos, Hayden said, "A political ideology that was born out of violence and pushed upon the world with violence by a dishonest tyrant deserves as much criticism as it can get, and hopefully in time, people will see it for what it really is."
They then go on to include the screenshot where I'm talking to my Muslim friend, Fahad Alwi. Funny how the Hackney Citizen failed to mention this screenshot when they tweeted me, or failed to mention this at all, but they bring it into the article. However, we will review this photo in a moment because I think it needs to be read in its entirety. The heading of that photo they posted on their article, it said, "Posts Hayden called Islam a violent political ideology, picture, Facebook." So not only did they steal pictures off my Facebook without permission, they also stole my words off Facebook without permission. But we'll get to that in a moment.
In the same post, he endorsed a piece from the far-right website Gates of Vienna titled "The Crusades, a Response to Islamic Aggression," and said, "As David previously stated, the Crusaders was simply a response to Islam spreading through Europe by the sword. Should they have sat back and done nothing and watched while the Christians were taxed into submission or beheaded?"
Just for your guide, an endorsement on Facebook in the Hackney Citizens world is someone liking a post. So I must have liked that post. Someone had said that and I liked it. I can't disagree with anything that person said because what they're saying in that post is a simple fact.
In his video of the Robinson event, Hayden attacked the UK's refusing entry to Austrian Martin Sellner of the alt-right group Generation Identity, who last summer tried to block NGO ships rescuing migrants in the Mediterranean. When contacted by the Citizen, Hayden said he attended the Robinson rally because he believes in free speech, and said he doesn't share the views of everyone who spoke there. He said, "I've stated Islam as a violent political ideology. Note the word political and not religious. Note, I do not refer to Muslims. I refer to the political ideology. My views have always been public. If you mean the fact that I'm happy to voice my discontent for communism, fascism, Islam, and other extreme political ideologies, there is no secret to this." When asked about his support for far-right anti-Muslim politics, Hayden replied, "Define far-right. I don't support any far-right parties and I'm not anti-Muslim." He also restated his views on the UK's refusing entry to Sellner and other alt-right activists, saying, "I personally think this is a disgrace considering they are either conservative journalists and lean to the right on the political spectrum. Do they preach hate? No. And yet the UK government has never stopped a number of hate preachers entering our country and preaching hate." Samir Jira, chair of the Hackney Green Party, said, "Far-right extremists and their sympathisers have no place in our community. Islamophobic attitudes like these are vile, ignorant and hateful. We are deeply concerned about the growing influence of racist and anti-immigrant attitudes in the Conservative Party at a national level." He added, "Hopefully the quick action taken against this person shows they are willing to challenge these views."
These screenshots the Hackney Citizen refers to in the article are from my Facebook dated the 18th of March 2018. And it's me checking in at Hyde Park Speaker's Corner. Speaker's Corner, a very famous part of London. It's on the north-east side of Hyde Park, near Marble Arch. And it's famous for the fact that people like George Orwell, Vladimir Lenin, Karl Marx, and even George Galloway have stood on a soapbox and debated with the common folk who frequent Hyde Park, including myself, on a regular basis, just to hear different points of view, just to give our opinion on life, and also just to engage in a good debate where people with different opinions can meet one another and discuss ideas. I simply attended that day, and like most Sundays, there was a large crowd there. However, this Sunday, there was a significant crowd there. Like I said earlier, I made a video about this day, which can be found on my YouTube channel under the title Free Speech Rally, and I'll put a link just there in the top right corner. Was it wise for me to take a selfie with flags behind me? I'll be honest, not the most flattering of selfies, possibly one of the worst selfies I've ever done, but reality was I wasn't being vain, I wasn't really thinking about it. I was simply just pointing out that I was at Speaker's Corner, I was checking in, and then I believed in free speech. And given my past history of aligning myself with the Pirate Party, which is all about free speech, you can see why I favour free speech. The individuals who attended that day, all walks of life, as you can see from the same post, various Muslim men, there were Christians there were Jews there, you name it. There was a large gathering of people who some favoured free speech and some didn't favour free speech, but that's the nice thing about the place. It's a place to debate, it's a place to discuss ideas, something the Hackney Citizen is clearly not in favour of, discussing ideas. And obviously because of the infamy of who Tommy Robinson is, Stephen Yaxley Lennon is his real name, the Metropolitan Police were out in force. They usually are actually. There's always a large presence at Speaker's Corner every Sunday. Sometimes people get a little bit heated in their debates, and sadly some people do occasionally turn to violence. But on this day, the people who were in favour of free speech certainly didn't turn to violence. The post that was shown on the article was a screenshot to a response that I'd given to my Muslim friend Fahad Alwi. He'd posted under the check-in a comment, and that comment that he posted generated 125 replies. So you can see what he said generated some debate, and this is after the event had taken place. This is when I was at home. So Fahad Alwi said,
"I respect and welcome freedom of speech. I also find that acts perpetrated by the Islamic terrorists in this country abhorrent. This speech doesn't distinguish Muslims like myself from those who commit acts of terror. Acts of terror which are committed by various faiths across the world. Only now the focus is on Islamic terrorism because they seem to be so active and vocal with their fascist and totalitarian ideologies. These are not the same ideologies as the ones shared by Muslims like myself. Why should I feel like I'm being indoctrinated into that group by Tommy just for being a Muslim? I have never claimed those acts of terror nor acted in any way that would go against anyone's human rights. Tell me, where is the distinguish? Should I feel like I'm a criminal? Like I do not belong in this country? His message is his own right to spread, but aligning yourself with him because of his hate is wrong. But still, a right that you, I, and everyone in this democratic country is granted. Just be mindful for that every stone thrown at a terrorist, 9 more are thrown at an innocent person, mistaken by someone who is filled with media-reported hate, that has had enough and sought to punish the next person they saw that resembled a member of a group he had been taught to hate and fear. I've had friends persecuted and attacked for walking to get milk."
okay, it's a fair comment. I'm not disagreeing with that, it's a fair comment. But it's also a comment that generated debate, and it's why his comment got 125 replies. And a couple of those replies were from myself, because obviously he directed that comment at me. My response, which wasn't shown by the Hackney Citizen, but then again I guess they couldn't show all of the responses, but they did show one of my responses. But let me just show you the first response. "Thanks for engaging. He or I have nothing against Muslims. He has a problem with Islam. He and I and you, I would imagine, have studied the Quran and the life of Muhammad. Muhammad was a warlord who spread Islam by the sword. This is the way of Islam. You can claim it isn't, but you would be kidding yourself. The perfect Muslim is the Prophet Muhammad. If everyone emulated his life, there would be a lot of bloodshed. Today's speech is a speech that was supposed to be given by Martin Sellner, but instead the British government, who seem to be anti-free speech these days, arrested him and his journalist girlfriend at the border, then detained them for 2 to 3 days before deporting them and banning them from the UK. All because Martin was going to make the speech Tommy Robinson made today. and Brittany Pettibone has the audacity to want to interview Mr. Robinson. Hence, the majority of people there today were standing there for the right to free speech for all. There's not hate in wanting free speech for all and not wanting our government to shut down conversation. My friend Fahad Alwi then responded to me. Now, I could read all of this, but I think it's a little bit inappropriate just to read it all. However, if you would like to read it, I recommend you can pause it and you can read his words word for word, but he starts off with, "I completely agree with you on the points of free speech." And then at the end he says, "P.S. I also believe talking things out. I believe conversations are to be had regardless of how sensitive or offensive they are to anyone. How else do we move forward as people? We won't colonize Mars otherwise." Addressed to Alex Van der Hayden. Smile, laugh. Which I thought was a nice message. My friend who I'm connected with, who lives in the US, David Knapp, responded and gave his viewpoint on it. He proceeded to post an article by the blog Gates of Vienna. Now, I simply liked what he posted because he was effectively agreeing with what I said, and that, according to the Hackney Citizen, is me aligning myself and endorsing the Gates of Vienna, but instead that was me liking a comment that David made. And that's it. This is how the world of debate works. This is how the world of Facebook works. And reality is, it's taught me a lesson that one should not waste one's time debating online, even though you're debating with just good friends, because it will be taken out of context. The next screen is the screen that was also shown in the article. The journalist didn't post the other screenshots. I just put them in there for context. However, this is what he did post in the article. So we may as well read this because it is in the article. Fahad Alwi. I'm going to have to side with David Knapp on this one. He pretty much gives the response needed. In that case, I think we probably best read David Knapp's response. David said,
Fahad Alwi. All religions violent throughout history? I'm not sure I agree with that. If you're referring to the Crusades, that was my response to centuries of Islamic conquering of vast territories and the wanton rape and slaughter. And in more recent times, of course, Israel has to defend itself against the daily Islamic terror. Defending Islamic aggression is not aggression in itself, hardly, nor is it an indication of religion being violent. It is called fighting back. It is, in a word, resistance to the Islamic conquerors and aggressors, and it is 100% justified and necessary for the survival of an independent people's culture, heritage, security, and their way of life. So let's not go there with all religions are violent. Cheers and peace.
Now that's just David's response to Fahad. Fairly reasonable. You may disagree, you may not disagree, but this is what public debate is. He then said,
history and proper context of the Crusades matters. 4 centuries of Islamic aggression have taken their toll. Vienna was about to fall, which would have potentially thrown the entire religion of Europe under the Islamic totalitarian rule. Ironically, Europe is again under the threat of being taken over, but from within, and a major assist from dangerously naive progressivism and damaging political correctness that lead to absurd proclamations of hate speech that serves only to crush free speech.
And then he posts an article from the Gates of Vienna, and those 2 likes, one is from myself and one is also from myself, because you can see it's highlighted as a like. So he used my friend posting his opinion and me simply liking, and that simply gave him the ammunition to basically say that I endorse the Gates of Vienna website, which I had never seen up until that point. But let's just see what I say. Fahad Alwi. I'm going to have to side with David Knapp on this one. He pretty much gives the response needed. Have you even fully read the Quran or studied the life of Muhammad in its entirety? The majority of people who call themselves Christians haven't fully read the Bible, and I know the same goes for the majority of Muslims when it comes to the Quran. I am an atheist, and yet I've studied all in detail. But to even believe all religions are the same, or they all have pinches of good and bad, is very naive. The Quran is littered with violent verses and calls for the death of non-believers. You say no one is saying Jesus was a warlord, or a tyrant, or a rapist. That's because he wasn't. He may have been deluded, a magician, or a charlatan,
But he was also a hippie who loved his neighbours and preached only peace. Muhammad did nothing of the sort. In one day alone, he killed over 600 Jews personally. In his lifetime, he killed thousands. You may label yourself a Muslim, but I know you choose not to emulate Muhammad. As David previously stated, the Crusaders were simply a response to Islam spreading through Europe by the sword. Should they have sat back and done nothing and watched while Christians were taxed into submission or beheaded? I'm thankful Jesus wasn't like Muhammad. Imagine how effed up the world would be if Jesus had spread the gospel by the sword. The world would be a very much more violent place. Post the Middle Ages, Christianity had a reformation. This has never happened in Islam. Muslims who try to reform Islam suffer more persecution than anyone else. It's one thing to believe, but it's another to state that a violent political ideology can't be criticised, just in the same way communism and fascism can't be openly criticised, unless you work for The Guardian. A political ideology that was born out of violence and pushed upon the world with violence by a dishonest tyrant deserves as much criticism as it can get, and hopefully in time, we will see it for what it really is. I hope eventually it will be but a footnote in the history books, and we can all move on and live in peace without it, as we clearly do not need it. So there's what I wrote. I don't think I was being anti-Muslim. Yes, I was critical of Islam, but I've been critical of all religions. Notice in that passage how I referred to Jesus as a magician or a charlatan, but no article has been written about me calling me anti-Christian. I'm not anti-Christian, just in the same way I'm not anti-Muslim. But now you have everything in context, let's proceed. And that's the end of the article. The general response from the majority of the readers seemed to think what this so-called journalist wrote was absolutely disgusting. On the day the Hackney Citizen article was published online, I received an email from the Hackney Conservatives. They waited until the article was in the paper to make contact with me. The person who made contact with me was a chap called Lewis Mosley. And yes, you have that right, a relative of Oswald Mosley. And Lewis Mosley sent me this email.
Dear Alex, on the 16th of April, the Hackney Conservative Federation received reports from a local newspaper about your activities and posts that you are alleged to have made on social media. The allegations are that on the 18th of March, you attended a rally organised by Tommy Robinson, the far-right activist and former leader of the English Defence League. You said it was a disgrace that the UK refused entry to Austrian far-right generation identity activist Martin Sellner for the same event. You said the Crusades were justified to stop the spread of Islam in Europe. Quotation, the Crusaders were simply a response to Islam spreading through Europe by the sword. Should they have sat back and done nothing and watched while the Christians were taxed into submission or beheaded? End of quotation. You said of Islam, a religion of peace, more like religion of total scumbags. You liked a post by the far-right Gates of Vienna website. You promoted a book by the former editor of Breitbart UK on how Sharia law is coming to a neighbourhood near you. Copies of these social media posts are attached in this email contained herein. In view of the seriousness of these allegations, it was determined at a meeting of the association's management team held on the 16th of April 2018 that your membership of the Conservative Party be suspended pending formal expulsion proceedings. You will have an opportunity to be heard at the next meeting of the Executive Council. I will write to you with details in due course. Any member suspended from the party may not participate in any Conservative Party activity, including attendance at meetings and social events. Yours sincerely, Lewis Mosley.
So of course I had to respond. It seems I was suspended without anyone having a conversation with me. It seems they threw me to the wolves and failed to even speak to me on the telephone, text message, email, which is strange given the fact that over the years I've gone out of my way to help the Conservative Party. I did respond. I responded to every single one of those allegations because I felt like they needed to be responded to. So let's go through those allegations.
On the 18th of March, you attended a rally organised by Tommy Robinson, the far-right activist and former leader of the English Defence League.
I was at Speaker's Corner supporting free speech. The video of that day is here. Free speech rally, Speaker's Corner, London. I made this video. I enclosed a link to the video.
You said it was a disgrace that the UK refused entry to Austrian far-right generation identity activist Martin Sellner for the same event.
It is a disgrace. I may not agree with everything Martin Sellner stands for, but I believe in his right to free speech. I even signed a petition demanding to let him, Brittany Brittybone and Lauren Southern into the country.
They were detained and then deported. And yes, I stand by it being a disgrace. See the petition below. So I attached the petition response I got back from the UK government prior to this happening.
Dear Alexander Van der Hayden, the government has responded to the petition you signed, saying, allow Brittany Prettybone, Lauren Southern and Martin Sellner entry to the UK. Border Force has the power to refuse entry to an individual if it's considered that his or her presence in the UK is not conducive to the public good. Freedom of speech, freedom of worship, democracy and rule of law and equal rights define us as a society. The government is committed to upholding free speech, and legislation is already in place to protect these fundamental rights. However, this freedom cannot be an excuse to cause harm or spread hatred. UK legislation values free speech and enables people to wish to engage in debate to do so, regardless of whether others with views which are being expressed. Everyone has a right to freedom of expression under Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights. This is a qualified right, however, which means that it can be restricted for certain purposes to the extent necessary in the democratic society.
Basically, the UK government were so fearful of what one man had to say and what another woman had to say, another woman potentially interviewing Tommy Robinson, that they basically threw all of that out of the water, disregarded the right to freedom of speech and equal rights. But continuing.
The Home Office is unable to comment on individual cases.
Of course they are unable to comment. They never comment on individual cases because they are cowards.
On the whole, the government takes a robust stance against individuals whose presence in the country might not be conducive to the public good. Any individual whose presence in the UK is deemed not conducive to the public good will be refused entry on a case-by-case basis.
And yet, hate preacher after hate preacher over the last few decades has been let into the UK, no problems and no questions asked. It's one rule for one political ideology and it's another rule for those on the conservative side that question that political ideology. So it's really very obvious the UK government doesn't value freedom of speech. Anyway, that was my evidence to show that I had taken the time to sign a petition because I believe in free speech. That response came from the petitions team at the UK government and Parliament. The next allegation that Lewis Mosley made via the email was,
You said the Crusades were justified to stop the spread of Islam in Europe. Quotation, the Crusaders were simply a response to Islam spreading through Europe by the sword. Should they have sat back and done nothing and watched while Christians were tacked into submission and beheaded?
So my response to Lewis and the Hackney Conservatives at the time was, can you point me in the direction to a historian that would claim this isn't true? I'm not a Christian, I am an atheist, I'm simply stating a fact. How was the Crusades not a response to Islam spreading through Europe by the sword? If you are a historian and you have studied the history of Europe as much as I have and have a different viewpoint on this, please do enlighten me. Just a side note before I continue, all of my statements, no one ever responded back, no one ever enlightened me on anything, no one ever came back with any evidence to suggest I was wrong. I'm stating my opinion, I'm always open to new evidence. So next, accusation.
You said of Islam, religion of peace, more like the religion of total scumbags.
If you note, I'm reacting to a news story that comes from Afghanistan. Afghan woman barbarically lynched after being falsely accused of burning Quran. And then my response to this was, do you really want to suggest a religion that was started by a warlord who was responsible for the beheading of 700 to 1,000 Jewish neighbors in one day is a religion of peace? The term religion of peace actually comes from George Bush Jr. post 9/11 when he addressed the world and his nation on live TV. Never in its history until that point had Islam been labelled the religion of peace. But now, the Marxist left will let you believe it is. The word scumbag is probably going a little easy on the perpetrators of an act that involved lynching a woman. Should we commend these people? Should we say they are nice people? Is it acceptable to lynch a woman? And the very fact that they did it in the name of religion? What would be the official line from the Conservative Party on lynching of women? I asked the question, they never came back on that question. Next accusation.
You like to post by the far-right Gates of Vienna website.
So obviously I have gone into this in the video, but here's my response. I like to post from an obscure Facebook page that I don't like, meaning a friend posted it so it appeared on my timeline.
A broken clock can be right twice a day.
Maybe this was one of their posts that was right twice a day. Now, it turns out it was posted in the discussion under his evidence. At the time, I didn't know where I liked it, but as you see from the video, I provided the evidence on where I liked the Gates of Vienna website, and it's simply liking the article that my friend had used in the comments for addressing Fahad. Next accusation.
You promoted a book by the former editor of Breitbart UK, How Sharia Law is Coming to a Neighbourhood Near You.
Correction, he is still the editor of Breitbart London. That was a correction, obviously, on the 18th of April. He's no longer working at Breitbart, just for your guide. Raheem Kassam is a very successful political commentator, very successful author, very successful conservative blogger, and also podcaster. And my response was, and the man is a fine chap and a patriot to the UK. He speaks at CPAC every year in the States, a conservative forum. He wrote a book. I simply stated it was a good read. It is. Apparently, you're not allowed to recommend a book anymore if it's wrongthink in the Conservative Party. And there I posted a picture of basically election night when Donald Trump won in 2016. And in that picture is Nigel Farage next to Donald Trump. On the right of the picture is Raheem Kassam. I stand by everything I have said. I stated this to the Hackney Gazette. See, I got the Hackney Gazette confused again, but in reality it's the Hackney Citizen. I wasn't even aware of who the Hackney Citizen was. The only newspaper in Hackney I knew of at the time was the Hackney Gazette. I stated this to the Hackney Gazette when they contacted me prior to this email. It's very clear what angle the Hackney Gazette is attempting to take. If you want to use a ridiculous term, Islamophobia, let it be known before that if you dare publish the term Islamophobia, let it be known that Islam seeks to shield itself, an ideology, from criticism. It's as if every time you said smoking was a filthy habit, you were perceived to be calling all smokers filthy people. Human beings have rights and are entitled to respect. But when did we start extending those rights to ideas, books, and beliefs? You'd think the difference would be clear, but it isn't. The ploy has worked over and over again, and now everyone seems petrified of being tagged with that label. The phobia of being called Islamophobic is on the rise, and it's becoming much more rampant, powerful, and dangerous than Islamophobia itself. Thanks to journalists like yourself who seem to want to label those who disagree with a political ideology. End of quotation, which I'd sent to the Hackney Citizen. And then I respond back to Lewis Mosley saying, imagine if a Conservative MP had the same trust or access to a US President of the United States, but instead the Conservatives are getting smashed out the way by Marxists dictating what you can and can't say. Sincerely, Alexander Van ter Heyden. So the good friend of the Labour Party, Mr. Adam Barnett, didn't think one article about me was good enough. The mainstream media was clearly not picking up on his story. Despite most readers calling out for his shockingly bad journalism, Adam Barnett wanted blood. He wanted to truly damage me. A person who he had never met in person, he had never spoken to on the phone, and yet, as far as he was concerned, I clearly was a political opponent, despite being a paper candidate there to make up numbers. He wanted to drag my name further through his dirty paper. 3 days later, he printed the following.
Shock and outrage over suspended Tory candidates' anti-Muslim views by Adam Barnett, local democracy reporter.
AKA sponsored by the BBC.
April 20th, 2018.
3 days after the original article. So stealing a photo of mine from Facebook, a selfie I thought would never go further than my friend base.
Hackney politicians have expressed shock and outrage after a Conservative Party candidate's anti-Muslim and far-right posts on social media were revealed by the Hackney Citizen. Hoxton West candidate Alexander Van ter Heyden was suspended by the Conservative Party on Tuesday over his social media posts, calling Islam a violent political ideology and his sharing photos of himself at a far-right rally.
Okay, so let me just interrupt there. So at least it's only taken this terrible journalist 2 articles to realise my full name is Van ter Heyden. He's no longer calling me ter Heyden in this article, but he's calling me Van ter Heyden. And where's the his? What does the his mean? What does the his mean? There should be no his in this article. It should be and sharing photos of himself at Speaker's Corner, but not at a far-right rally. But let's continue.
The Hackney Conservative Party said it was not aware of his posts and is urgently investigating, having suspended him with immediate effect. Irene Livinga, the Women's Equality Party's candidate for mayor, said on Twitter, "I am shocked and upset to hear the local Conservative candidate anti-Islamic views worsened by denying Islam as a religion."
I'm sorry, but when did I deny Islam was a religion? Where in that article does it state that? If you're representing the Women's Equality Party, what does Islam say about female women's equality? I would love to know that, because I think you haven't got a clue.
Ivinga, who is also standing for a council seat in Bilston Ward, added, "My family home is in Hoxton. Thank goodness so few of my neighbours share his worldview." A Hackney Labour spokesperson, in a statement to the Citizen, said, "We think this is an internal matter for the Tory party, who need to do a better job for choosing their candidates." Congratulations to the Hackney Citizen journalists for exposing what appear to be unacceptable right-wing extremist views. We will go on campaigning vigorously to elect 3 good and Labour councillors in Hoxton West Ward, who will represent all the community. Dave Ravel, pictured, of the Liberal Democrats, a spokesperson for the Liberal Democrats who is standing in Hackney Central Ward, said, "How is this even possible in 2018 in our borough? Hackney is one of the most diverse places on the planet, and yet the Conservatives are so short of candidates that they have to apologise for putting forward an Islamophobe for our council." He added, "What's the criteria for being a Tory candidate? Simply that you walk through the door?"
Well, strangely enough, probably yes.
Green Party mayoral candidate Alistair Binney Lubbock, posting under the story on the Citizen's website, said, "Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, racism, sexism, ableism, transphobia, classism, and all discrimination and hatred have no place in our politics, workplaces, schools, hospitals, communities, and will absolutely not be tolerated in Hackney."
Can this guy be any more virtuous? Are there any isms that you've left out there?
Binney Lubbock, who is also standing in Hackney Downs Ward, added, "We have an opportunity to tell a different story, one about a kind, caring, inclusive society. Hackney is a great place to start." Conservative Party mayoral candidate Imites Lunet did not respond when contacted for comment earlier this week. Hayden also commented on the story attacking the Citizen, calling the piece pro-Labour article. He said, "I attended a free speech rally in London's Hyde Park. The Hackney Citizen is a cowardly Marxist publication that clearly doesn't like people speaking freely."
Notice he's calling me Hayden again.
Hayden was contacted for comment by the Citizen before Tuesday's story, and his answers were included in the report. He has since removed some of his anti-Muslim posts from his Facebook page, but the Conservative Party has been given screenshots of the posts.
As pointed out earlier, I didn't remove any screenshots. I simply changed my privacy settings for that post from public to viewable only to friends. Little was I aware that when I checked in to Speaker's Corner on a day where people were cheering for free speech, did I think a scumbag reporter who worked for the Hackney Citizen was going to do 2 hit pieces on me because of that. The end of the article says the Hackney Citizen's high-quality journalism is produced by a small team on a shoestring budget, so we're asking to make monthly contributions to fund our work, enabling the paper to survive and thrive. Well, this so-called real news, which looks like a smear, certainly didn't come cheap. It was with this article that suddenly the leftist mainstream rags started to pick up on the story. Of course, the MSM didn't look into the story themselves, they just parroted what the beta reporter Adam Barnett had previously written. Articles like, "Conservatives under fire for failing to tackle party's Islamophobia." My name was mentioned in that article. BBC News, "Muslim groups tell Tories to remove Islamophobia from the party." iNews, "Muslim Council of Britain's letter in full calling for the inquiry into Islamophobia in the Conservative Party." Now, the Muslim Council of Britain has been relentless when it comes to petitioning British government into pushing for this label of Islamophobia and making it a crime to criticise Islam. They are terrorists when it comes to free speech in this country. The Guardian, "Muslim leaders urge investigation into Tory Islamophobia claims." The Mirror, 3rd of May 2018, 2 days before the election. Now, 12 Tory election candidates suspended by the Conservative Party
Alexander Van ter Heyden was chosen to stand in the Conservative Party candidate in Hoxton, Westward and East London. So there were a few mainstream media follow-up articles in regards to these two articles printed by Adam Barnett. From the Socialist Worker, the Mirror, the Guardian, BBC News, of course. Basically, every left-wing publication you can think of in the UK wanted to use this non-story as a weapon to take down the Tories in the election. And sadly, this is where I'm left. My name is in tatters because of a left-wing activist who calls himself a journalist decided to smear my name. The rest of the left-wing mainstream media decided to parrot his poorly written articles. So obviously the election took place on the 5th of May, and as one would expect, I came last. I was expecting this before the bad publicity. I mean, it was always going to happen. The Conservatives always do badly in Hoxton. And it does not help having V as the last name. You have more of a chance of someone ticking the box if your surname begins with A than if your surname begins with X. So I lost. No surprise there. No tears were shed there. No one expected any different from the result. However, I think I reached out to the Conservatives via text or WhatsApp, and I apologise because I don't have a record of it. I was just asking what's my situation. So I got this email from Lewis Mosley on the 9th of May, that's 4 days after the election.
Dear Alex, your party membership was suspended pending an investigation into the allegations made against you. I expect this investigation to conclude shortly, and I will be in touch with you then about the next steps. Lewis Mosley, Chairman of the Hackney Conservative Federation.
Many months go by, and in that time, I lose my job at a hedge fund. Now, we could speculate for the reasons why I lost that job. Investors do not like people to work in their funds where money is coming from the Middle East to speak inappropriately about the religion of peace. So I lost my job. Having been out of work for a month, I get an email from the Hackney Conservatives. It's just a general email. They generally send emails asking for help, telling people of the updates. So on the 20th of November, they sent me an email saying, please help the residents of Hackney Borough petition against planned TfL rerouting. So rather than just delete the email and ignore it, I decided to respond to them and say, to the Hackney Conservatives, I'm still in the dark about my suspension. Very poor form on behalf of the Hackney Conservatives, given that I was suspended without trial or hearing because a member of Momentum had approached you from the Hackney Citizen. Regards, Alex Van ter Heyden. That was on the 20th of November 2018. Sunia Karishi from the Hackney Conservatives responded back. And this is a lady I'd never had any contact with before, or met, as far as I'm aware. I was slightly perplexed because obviously the last email I'd had from the Hackney Conservatives was from Lewis Mosley, but I hadn't heard back from him since May, and we were now in November.
Dear Alexander, I'm new to the Hackney Association. Let me take this up with the local team and get back to you. Best wishes, Sunia.
Dated Wednesday the 21st of November 2018. Okay, so I genuinely thought maybe I was going to find out if I was still suspended, if I was ever going to have a chance of speaking in front of a panel, if I was ever going to get a chance to sort of present my case. So let's see if they came back to me. They didn't come back to me, so I decided to send them another email on the 12th of December to Hackney Conservatives. And yet here I am, still waiting to hear back from the Conservatives. All I've heard again and again, we will get back to you, ever since April. That's in reference to the fact that I sent them text messages, WhatsApp messages, and spoken to a number of Conservatives asking them what the hell was going on. And I think I'd also informed a couple that because of this article, I no longer had a job. So let's continue. As the Conservatives cowardly suspended me before even speaking to me, the Hackney Citizen printed that smear article, and since then it has cursed me. That's in reference to the fact that I was now out of work. Now, anytime someone Googles my name, they see I was suspended by the Conservatives for anti-Muslim posts. Amazing, given that I never posted anything that was anti-Muslim. Criticising an ideology is far different from criticising the people who follow that ideology. So thanks to the Hackney Conservatives, the Hackney Citizen was able to post a headline that was half true and half false. Yes, I was suspended, but clearly not for anti-Muslim posts. Still waiting to hear back. Regards, Alex Van ter Heyden. On the 13th of December, I get an email from Sunia Karishi.
Dear Alexander, many thanks for your email. Let me check with our team.
what we can do. Best wishes, Sunia.
She's already had my first email back in November, and now this is me following up with my second email, and she's checking with the team. What happened to checking back in November? Sunia, without being rude, you pretty much said the same thing on the 21st of November, and I've been hearing the exact same line from everyone else since April 2018. Regards, Alex van der Hayden. Dated the 13th of December. Sunia Karishi gets back to me on Monday the 7th of January 2019, so a new year, and almost a month to respond.
Dear Alexander, many thanks for your email. I hope you had a good start to 2019. I've just returned from 3 weeks leave and picking up outstanding action points. I hope to meet with the Hackney team this coming week, so we'll try to get back to you thereafter. Best wishes, Sunia.
And that was in January 2019. I then put my head down. I tried my best to get on with life. It was a new year after all. I took myself off traveling for a little bit, but at the same time I was forever, every single day, applying for jobs. It took me 8 months to find a new job. 8 months. Now back in the past I could send my CV to 10 different places and usually expect 3 or 4 interviews to come out of that. In those 8 to 9 months where I was looking for a job, I sent my CV to over 1,000 different places. Every time I was met with radio silence, or for a moment there was small enthusiasm, and then suddenly that enthusiasm would evaporate because they would Google me, and occasionally someone would actually be decent enough to say, look, the reason we can't hire you or even have this conversation is because of what's on Google. Out of the 1,000 CVs that I sent out, I probably had that conversation 3 times. I managed to get seen by 3 different firms. The first firm, I didn't mention it in my initial interview. I didn't mention my press history. I got to the second round of interviews where it was just myself and another candidate. I thought it was possibly one of the best interviews of my life. And then suddenly, radio silence. And then I think a month or 2 went by. Finally, despite the fact that they'd previously said they were super keen to hire, a very vague rejection email. I quizzed them on the reason behind this, given the fact that there was a lot of enthusiasm during the interviews. They refused to say. The second place, an Israeli company, I came clean because I thought by not being open and honest about the history in the press, the same thing might happen to me. So I came clean to them at the end of the interview, which went extremely well. And then there was a look of shock on their faces. In the room, there were 5 different people. They said they appreciated me telling them this and they didn't think it would be a factor. But then I never really heard back from them again, despite follow-up emails. The third place I interviewed at, I went through 4 rounds of interviews. It was a company I really, really wanted to work at. It was a company that I felt I had the skill set to work at. I was able to bring my previous career history, my client base, contacts, experience, enthusiasm, drive to the position. But this time I decided I wasn't going to mention the press articles. I figured if it was relevant, they would ask me about it. I was hired. I got the job. I'd actually never been happier about getting any job in my life before. When I got that job, I felt like I was able to start again. I got the job and I honestly felt like the gods were giving me a second chance. I felt like this is a big corporation that values talent and values people that want to work hard, and they could see that I had the skill set to do the job. And I just assumed that they'd look past it. With the job offer came an external background checking company, but I'd started in the position before the external background check was complete. I provided references, I provided everything they wanted me to provide. I know the background company was still checking my references despite working overtime, despite working my ass off, despite attending events at weekends for charity events on behalf of the company, and despite picking up clients almost on a daily basis, literally putting all my effort and energy and never working so hard in my life into a position that I loved, into a position that I really, really cared about. I was taken into a human resources office in September and let go. Just simply told, it's not working out. The thing is, my boss
never mentioned anything to me, never had a conversation with me to say things weren't working out. Every update in the progress of my work, everyone was very happy with my work. I hadn't had any complaints, and yet I know that when the references came back, they saw a reason to fire me, and I can only presume it's the same reason that 1,000 companies look past my professionally written CV with a wealth of financial market experience. It took me 8 months and 1,000 CVs to find that job. I was denied employment again and again and again, and yet when I had that job, I felt like I had some worth once again. And the reason it took me 1,000 CVs, and I still have the problem now, is because human resources departments in every company looked at Google and took the option of not wanting the grief and saying no. And what do I mean by grief? Well, the average employer now has 3 fears when it comes to hiring me. Will hiring me offend the extreme left, where they publicize this fact and cause the company to get bad press, potentially lowering the company's share price, smearing the company's reputation? Will a violent Islamist go all Charlie Hebdo on the company because they hired a person who dared to question Islam? Or the third reason, I could really be a far-right, racist extremist who might suddenly shoot up the workplace. As I've lost my hair in part due to the stress of all of this, I may even now look the part of the far-right extremist. And yet, this is not me. Yes, I hold conservative views, and yes, I believe in free speech. But this doesn't make me a violent extremist. Is it possible a violent leftist or Islamist could attack the company I work for? Yes, it is. Is this right or my fault? Of course it's not. And yet the world we now live in, because of these threats, it feels like my career is over. It feels like I have less worth to a potential employer than a hardened criminal who is fresh out of prison. Criminals are given the chance, and yet because a parasitic left-wing journalist who used to write for the Hackney Citizen decided to smear my name, my job prospects have been flushed down the toilet. People do not hire or want to be seen to hire those that have made the press for the reasons I made the press. So having received a job offer in June 2019 and being fired in September 2019 for reasons unknown, but I think we know the reasons, I was suddenly without a job again. So the Hackney Conservatives sent out a general email, I think days after I'd lost my job, asking the members if they were well. So my response to them was, on Saturday the 28th of September 2019, to the Hackney Conservatives, am I well? Well, since being suspended from the Hackney Conservatives and hearing this from a left-wing journalist who decided to write 2 smear articles about me, all because I was willing to stand as a paper candidate in the May 2018 election, I then proceeded to lose my job at a hedge fund in September 2018. Once they saw the press had been written in April and May 2018, it took me 9 months to get a real job after this, because no one would touch me because a journalist who had claimed I had been suspended by the Conservatives for having an opinion the day after the London Bridge attack and being for free speech. I've had no communication on this matter since this time, despite repeated requests. 2.5 months into the job, September 2018, I was let go because the external background check had revealed my media exposure. My life and career has been ruined all because I decided to stand in Hoxton West in May 2018 because the Hackney Conservatives didn't have enough candidates. Fool me for agreeing to help. And rather than referring to me before speaking to any journalist prior to supposedly suspending me, I was thrown to the wolves without a word from anyone. And despite repeated requests to Conservatives about the situation, I'm still in the dark on whether I'm still suspended or not. Given that I was able to vote in the leadership contest and get these regular emails, I presume I'm not. But who knows? No one has reached out to me, despite being told repeated times by numerous people they would come back to me. Regards, Alex van der Hayden. So this is true. I got to vote in the leadership contest. So the fact that I was able to vote, you would assume I'm not suspended. But nobody had told me this. But let's see what they say. And this time, someone else responded to me. Jack Sutcliffe.
Dear Alex, thank you for your email. I'm sorry to hear about everything that happened. Since the council elections, the association has been largely inactive, with the website emails not being checked, no canvassing, etc. We're once again active. I've looked into your record and see no suspensions, meaning you are indeed a member. Whether you wish to remain a member is your choice, but I confirm your membership is live at the local level. Once again, I'm very sorry to hear about what happened. Sincerely yours, Jack Sutcliffe, chairman of the Hackney Conservatives.
So basically what they're saying, I'm not suspended, and I never was suspended, which is the reason I was able to vote in the leadership contest. I know that many conservative associations have dealt with dissidents by just allowing their memberships to lapse. For example, if someone doesn't continue paying their subs, then they're off the books and they don't need to worry about the situation again. However, I continued paying my subs on a monthly basis, so the Hackney Conservatives and the Conservative Party had been receiving money from me every single month. And this is the first contact I'd had from them since January 2019, and I'm hearing this on the 28th of September 2019. So I responded back to them, Jack, this needs to be investigated then. If I was never suspended, then the headlines written about me are a lie and untrue. Hence, if that's the case, maybe I can get the Hackney Citizen to delete their articles. Would appreciate your insight into this, Alex. Jack seems like a good man. He responded straight back to me.
Hi Alex, I will look into this for you, no problems. Please give me a bit of time as it's conference season. You have my direct email now, and I'll do my best to come back to you in the next week or so. Please do chase me if you haven't heard from me by the close of play Friday. Kind regards, Jack. 28th of September 2019.
Jack comes back to me on the 4th of October 2019.
Alex, I'm still looking into this. I haven't been able to speak with the relevant people due to being a Jewish holiday season. Additionally, I'm starting a new job on Monday, but I hope to be able to come back to you by the end of the next week. Kind regards, Jack.
Lucky Jack gets to start a new job, whereas I remain in the wilderness back in October. So I write, Jack, this is a little deja vu. Anytime I've left this with anyone from the Hackney Tories, they said they would come back, and then nothing. Appreciate you have been busy, but this has been ongoing since April 2018. Regards, Alex van der Hayden. Email received on the 15th of October 2019.
Alex, I understand your problem is ongoing. There's been a number of Jewish holidays, so speaking to the necessary people to get a better understanding of what's actually happened has been difficult. Thanks for the reminder. I'll chase the relevant people today. Kind regards, Jack.
Email received from Jack on the 23rd of October 2019.
Dear Alex, I've spent some time looking into things for you. I can confirm you were suspended, but your suspension has been lifted. I will not be reaching out to the press. I appreciate this is not the outcome you were hoping for, but I now consider the matter closed. Kind regards, Jack Sutcliffe, Chairman of the Hackney Conservatives.
So I respond back on the 23rd of October 2019. Hi Jack, I wasn't after the Conservatives to reach out to the press. I don't want to ever be in the press again. I was after an understanding how I could have been thrown to the gutter press so the headline could be written, Tories suspended, without even a telephone call or a face-to-face conversation at the time. I've also been trying to get closure on this so I could attempt to move along. The articles still appear in search, and because of this, no one will hire me. All because of the Hackney Citizen smearing journalism. When was the suspension lifted? Would it have not been wise to tell me this? Appreciates it may not have been you when it was lifted. I would like to hear back from you, or the Conservatives. Alex van der Hayden. He responds back pretty much straight away.
Hi Alex, the suspension was lifted before my time. Kind regards.
So a lot of people have asked me, why do I not just ask Google to remove the articles from the search? I have. There's a thing called the EU privacy removal form. I know it works because I know a person who every time you searched his name, a news article about his brother would appear as the first result. Now, sadly for him, his brother isn't a good person. His brother was convicted of rape. There was a number of news articles written about him, which you think fair enough. However, this was impacting his brother's life because people would search his name and him and his brother looked very similar. So I helped him do a EU privacy removal. We did the process together because I had prior experience with trying to remove the articles that were impacting me. So I thought, let me try to give it a go to remove the articles that were impacting him. So just like me, my friend was suffering from the impact of having articles slightly connected to him, but reality not connected to him, because the articles were about his brother,
but simply due to the association of his brother, these articles were impacting his relationships, they were impacting his job prospects, and they were impacting his life. So we went about removing these articles. Within 48 hours to 72 hours, my friend's connection to his brother was no longer visible on Google. Google had done the decent thing and removed the articles. I have not been as lucky. Google hasn't removed any articles about me. Anytime someone searches my name, these articles pop up, which was impacting my career, which is impacting my life, which has impacted my relationships, which has impacted pretty much my entire existence. In all honesty, these articles have destroyed my life. But the thing is, when I requested for these articles to be removed under the EU privacy removal law, I input the details of each damning newspaper article. Every time I did, I would get a response back similar to this on every single article, because each one would have to be submitted individually.
Having assessed the balance of relevant rights and interests relating to the content in question, including factors such as your role in public life, Google has decided not to block this content. At this time, Google has decided not to take action on this URL.
The thing is, I don't have a role in public life. I was a paper candidate in a council election. I wasn't running for Congress, I wasn't running for Senate, I wasn't running for president, and I wasn't running as an MP, and I wasn't an MP. And yet, if I'd raped someone, or murdered someone, or done some awful, awful crime, I know for a fact Google would remove those articles to protect the individual's privacy, because that is what the EU privacy removal law allows. And going back to my friend who I helped out, whose brother had raped a poor woman, I put in his details, I put in his first name and last name, his contact email address, and we uploaded his passport together. Within 48 hours, the content was removed for him. I don't have that same right. Google protects rapists, Google protects murderers, Google allows these people to get on with their lives, and yet someone that dared criticize an idea has had his life destroyed because yesterday's news stories are no longer today's fish and chip wrapping. Because when something's printed online, unless that newspaper goes bankrupt and the website gets taken down, that is there for life. The internet's not going away, so those articles are not going away. And what that means, my career in the financial markets, my career in the business world, my career in the corporate world, due to political correctness, due to left-leaning activists putting pressure on corporations to not hire people who have a different political view to them, my career is over. I even went to the ICO in regards to the articles that were printed about me. It's the Information Commission Office. It's the UK's independent authority to set up to uphold information rights in the public interest, promoting openness by public bodies and data privacy for individuals. I'd basically heard that these guys might be able to help me. They responded to me towards the end of 2019 saying,
Dear Mr. Van der Hayden, I'm writing regarding the concern you have raised with the ICO about Google's refusal to remove the following search engine results containing information about you. Hackney Citizen, Independent, Mirror, Vice, The Guardian, Beatraden, Gates of Vienna, Vice. You have made separate requests for each search result, and Google has refused them on all grounds of the relevant rights and interests relating to the content, including such factors as your role in public life. We have developed a list of factors we will take into account when considering concerns from individuals whose requests have been refused. Further information about your criteria is available here. Our decision: we have considered the factors which are relevant to your removal request, and we've decided it is likely that the search results comply with the data protection legislation. We do not therefore expect Google to remove the links. As I understand it, you stood as a candidate in the local elections in 2018. The basis on which you agreed to stand as a candidate is not really for the ICO to consider. The fact appears to be you did stand and therefore entered the public arena. The article, which was subsequently written about you in the Hackney Citizen and picked up by other news media, is a legitimate journalistic reporting. We recognise the importance of search results in making journalistic content available to the public, and we acknowledge that freedom of expression is a fundamental right. Furthermore, the article contains quotes from you and extracts from the social media postings you have made. I appreciate that articles may be having a detrimental impact on you, but there is a clear public interest in the freedom of expression issue in journalists being able to comment on individuals who have put themselves forward in public election. From the information available to us, it does not appear that Google have breached data protection laws. I believe that says we will not continue further about this matter and do not intend to take any further action. If you disagree with this view we've provided, please note that individuals are entitled to make their own cases in court. Irrelevant of our decision, the ICO cannot assist individual court applications, and we will recommend that you seek independent legal advice to pursue this option. If you are dissatisfied with this service you have received from the ICO or would like to provide us with feedback of any kind, please contact us. Please let me know. Yours sincerely, Phil Hesford, Lead Case Officer.
So here's the thing, we don't know how biased the ICO really is. Would they have been as conclusive about the acceptability of smearing journalism if I'd been on the opposite side of the political spectrum? There's honestly no way of knowing. And it just seems to me that they think it's acceptable that a journalist can write a headline saying Tory candidate suspended for anti-Muslim social media posts, when in fact nothing of the sort is true. And there was no evidence that I'd ever said anything that was anti-Muslim. So here's the thing. I did seek out legal advice, and the lawyers that I spoke to said there really isn't much they can do about it. It's a common thing in the United Kingdom for journalists to smear a person's reputation. And this is where I'm left. My enemies will laugh at this, I know that. I have a few enemies. Sadly, when you are vocal about your opinions, you create enemies. But here's the thing, I wouldn't wish this upon anyone. What I've been through since this happened, I could never have envisioned 10 years ago. I honestly don't know how I'm going to rebuild my life, because right now no one's hiring me. Oh, why didn't you start your own business? I did that. I had a successful brokerage for over 5 years, but even running my own brokerage, I had people attempting to dox my business. And then thanks to the European Union imposing MiFID II regulation, it forced my business to close. Hence, I'm not a fan of the European Union, and the way I used to make money is no longer a way of making money now in the financial markets. I hesitated about making this video. I'll be honest, I hesitated for a very long time about making this video. I've kept my downfall hidden from most people, but I've now got to the stage where I feel if I just remain silent forever, then this could happen to someone else. Am I still trying to rebuild myself? Of course I am. I'm not a quitter. It's the reason I continue making content on YouTube. It's the reason I create content online. I've created content for the sole purpose of pushing this negativity off the internet. It's reached the point now where I've lost 2 jobs because of this. I can no longer continue to hide from this. I believe a change needs to happen where people's lives are not ruined for speaking freely. I believe every topic should be up for political debate without fearing that careers can be ended. We as a nation, as a civilization, Western civilization, are being silenced into submission by groups who would like us to submit. I'm not the first person in the West who has had his life ruined, and I will not be the last. Where I go from here, I feel my options are very limited. Should I have made this video? Maybe yes, maybe no. However, I've sat in silence for too long, and with each day that's passed, where I can't get a break, I feel if I didn't tell my story, and how a selfish left-wing radical destroyed my life, then maybe him and people like him would continue getting away with what they do. We need to change the political discourse. We need to accept people have different views. It's only through open dialogue can we learn from each other. Cancel culture is a real thing, and it has clearly impacted my life. I went from being able to work in the financial markets to suddenly nobody wanting to employ me, all because of what a grubby left-wing activist had decided to print in his third-rate local newspaper. Did the author intend to cancel me, or simply hold me to account for my views? Well, given that in the original article I was labelled as anti-Muslim, despite the author providing zero evidence that I was anti-Muslim, and then quickly following up with a follow-up article, I think it's easy to argue his intention was to smear my name, and because of the climate we live in, where the author knows that if you label someone anti-Muslim, you know damn well you are setting out to cancel this individual. Did the lady who called my workplace to get me fired want to cancel me? Of course she did.
Is this behaviour acceptable? Of course it's not. Should employers discriminate based on race? Of course they should not, and legally that is a crime. However, it is now clear, despite my politics being left and right depending on the topic in hand, it's clear due to reprisals, smears, and stigma articles like this can damage a person for life. Is that fair? I'm certain if you are on the far left, you will think this is very fair and be laughing right now. But I think any normal person that thinks this is fair or this is justified for having a view, you are clearly off your rocker, and it's only a matter of time before it will happen to you, someone you love, or someone you know. Life has not been easy since this happened. If I could turn back time and retract having a conversation with a friend who was Muslim, would I turn back time? Of course I would turn back time, because this has destroyed my life. I don't think any political debate is worth destroying one's life over. So where do I go next? Well, I still trade the financial markets on a personal basis from home every single day. It's not an easy job. I will keep making YouTube content, predominantly about travel. I'm in the process of making an app. If you would like to support me with that app, please support me via Pledstow, Subscribestar, Ko-fi, and by simply subscribing to the YouTube channel, because by subscribing to this YouTube channel you'll be alerted for when that app is available. It's a travel app, and it's an app that I think will help save people money. Maybe it will work, maybe it won't, but it's something I'm working on at the moment. But also, if you are able to support me in any way, I'll be honest, that kind of help will go a long way right now. I honestly want to thank you for listening to me. I have no desire to be in the public arena, and I have no desire to be a news story. I simply wanted to tell my story because I had to get it off my chest. I want to thank you for listening to me today. I know it's been a lot to listen to. I have no hate for those that have destroyed my life. This is the society we now live in. Free speech doesn't exist in the United Kingdom, and those that think wrongly will be destroyed by those that do not tolerate free speech or the free discussion of ideas.
The glass is half full. I won't let the left destroy me any further than they already have. Where we go from here, I hope you will join me on that journey. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.